All right, let's just jump right into this explainer, shall we? Today we're unpacking the absolutely astonishing 7,000-year history of a tiny island that literally shaped the fate of global empires. We are talking about Malta. It's the ultimate crucible of the Mediterranean, a place that's absorbed the cultures, the conflicts, and the wild ambitions of almost every major power in the region.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this story, we've got to start with this number, 160. Malta is a mere 160 square miles. I mean, to put that into perspective, it's basically a microscopic dot on the world map. Yet today, it holds a staggering population of around 430,000 people. It is actually one of the smallest, most densely populated countries on the entire planet.
And honestly, that brings us to the central mystery of this whole explainer. How on earth did such a microscopic piece of land, basically a limestone rock with hardly any natural resources, become the most fiercely contested naval fortress in the Mediterranean? Like, why did everyone from the ancient Romans to Napoleon Bonaparte decide they absolutely had to have it?
Section 1. Mystery of Megalithic Malta, from prehistoric isolation to stone giants.
So, to figure this out, we're winding the clock way back to around 5900 BC. At this point, Malta was this totally isolated sanctuary. It was completely uninhabited by humans, which meant unique, endemic wildlife just flourished there undisturbed after the Ice Age. But then, around 5500 BC, early farmers arrived from nearby Sicily and completely transformed the place. And I mean completely. They didn't just build little huts. They constructed these massive megalithic temples that are actually some of the oldest freestanding structures in the world today. Just try to imagine the sheer willpower and the logistics required to quarry and drag megaliths weighing up to 1,000 tons. And they did this without any modern machinery. They carved petroglyphs, organized these huge underground spaces, and then, after centuries of this incredible architectural boom, they just abruptly vanished. Poof. The archaeological record shows they simply seeded the ground, leaving behind nothing but unglazed cooking pots. It's wild.
Which brings us to Section 2. Crossroads of Mediterranean Empires, a rotating door of conquerors.
As we shift out of prehistory, Malta's strategic, dead-center location in the Mediterranean totally changed its destiny. It went from being this quiet, isolated sanctuary to basically a mandatory stepping stone for a dizzying, rotating door of imperial conquerors looking to control the seas. First up, the Phoenicians. They arrive in the 8th century BC and aptly named the island Malef. They took one look at its rocky geography and natural harbors and realized, okay, this is the perfect stronghold. And they were right. It became a crucial refuge for their trade networks. In fact, the name Malta is actually believed to be a direct evolution of that ancient Phoenician word for fortress.
So try to visualize this really intense cultural layering. It's like a giant historical sandwich. In 218 BC, the Romans sweep in, bringing St. Paul, who famously shipwrecked there, and they lay down a deep Christian heritage right alongside these stunning Roman mosaic villas. Then, boom, 868 AD, the Arabs conquer the island. They fundamentally shift the culture again, embedding deep Semitic roots right into the local language. Fast forward a bit to 1091 AD, and the Normans arrive, introducing feudalism and re-establishing Latin Catholicism. It is literally an archaeological dig of cultures just stacked directly on top of each other, building the incredibly complex, and sometimes conflicting, foundations of Malta's totally unique identity.
Moving into Section 3, Knights in the Great Siege, the Holy Fortress.
This cultural melting pot sets the stage for one of the most cinematic chapters in all of European history. The year is 1530. The Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, hands Malta over to the Knights of St. John. These knights had just been expelled from Rhodes, and they knew Malta was essentially their last stand. Their mission? Build an absolutely impregnable defense against the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. So, led by Grandmaster Jean-Paris de la Valette, they transformed the island into a massive, heavily fortified bastion. They were gearing up for a clash that wouldn't just decide the fate of Malta, but potentially the fate of all Christendom.
And that tension explodes into the legendary Great Siege of 1565. On May 18th, this overwhelming Ottoman armada shows up with 40,000 troops. The knights are massively, incredibly outnumbered. So they have to make this heartbreaking but strategic choice: hold Fort St. Elmo to the absolute bitter end. When the fort finally does fall on June 23rd, the defense was so brutal that it essentially drained the Ottomans' momentum and their resources. The knights gallantly managed to outlast the siege until a relief force finally sailed into the Grand Harbor on September 7th. It was a completely astonishing victory, one that echoed across all of Europe.
That takes us to Section 4, British Rule and World Wars, from Napoleon to Churchill.
So the Knights hold on to power for centuries, right? They build the magnificent capital of Valletta. But then, the French Revolution triggers the next massive upheaval. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1798, this rising military genius literally gets stuck because he desperately needs wind to carry his fleet to Egypt, and he sort of accidentally arrives at Malta. But Napoleon instantly understood its unparalleled strategic value. He noted that whoever held this quote-unquote barren rock guarded the entrance to and the exit from the Levant. He swept in and took the island from the weakened Knights almost overnight.
But here is the crazy twist. The French occupiers immediately managed to alienate the locals. I mean, they instantly started aggressively looting local treasures. We're talking stripping chapels of porcelain horses, decorative golden sails, historical swords, you name it. This blatant disrespect pushed the Maltese people right to their breaking point. They rebelled furiously. And realizing they needed a serious naval superpower to back them up, they actually voluntarily invited the British to take control in 1800. Think about that. They invited them in.
So under the British, Malta becomes this incredibly vital naval base. Fast forward to World War II, and that strategic value makes it a massive target all over again. Winston Churchill captured it perfectly and passionately when he said the Maltese were too courageous a people, too noble and long-suffering a land, not to be defended to the utmost. Throughout the war, this tiny island became the most heavily bombed place on Earth. The most heavily bombed, and yet the locals endured. They were down in the damp, grimy walls of the forts, passing biscuits and cakes to the armed forces during the absolute peak of the hostilities. Their resilience was, quite frankly, unbreakable.
Bringing us to our final chapter, Section 5, Forging a Modern Identity, the Cultural Mosaic.
Emerging from the absolute devastation of the World Wars, Malta finally gained its independence from Britain in 1964. Now, if you want to really understand the main takeaway from all this complex history, you just have to look at the modern Maltese language. It perfectly mirrors the island's past. It's a linguistic diglossia. On one hand, you have these deep Semitic roots, Arabic syntax, ancient derivational patterns left over from the Arab conquest. But on the other hand, you have this massive Latin and British overlay, just packed with Italian vocabulary and English administrative terms. It is actually the only Semitic language officially written in the Latin script. It's a living, breathing testament to their survival and assimilation.
And economically, the transformation has been just as dramatic. Malta completely transitioned away from relying on a British military base to become an upper-middle-income nation. And what's really impressive here is that manufacturing now contributes nearly 30% of their GDP, which compares exceptionally well with much larger developed countries. They didn't just survive independence, they rolled up their sleeves, industrialized, and totally adapted.
This modern boom was really solidified when Malta achieved full European Union integration in 2004, followed by adopting the euro in 2008. But they also pulled off some incredibly clever niche tourism strategies. Instead of just trying to compete on the standard sun and sea vacation package, they diversified. They set up lucrative language schools, drawing students from all over the globe, and they massively expanded their capacity for international cruise passengers. This tiny rock knows exactly how to leverage its geography and its heritage to thrive in a modern global economy. It's brilliant.
So, as we look at today's bustling, independent republic with its intricate language, its booming economy, and its beautifully preserved heritage, we have to ask ourselves one final question. Over 7,000 years, this island has absorbed the weight of empires and somehow emerged uniquely its own. Does the creative, resilient magic of those ancient temple builders, the ones who moved 1,000-ton stones with pure ingenuity, still pulse through the very stone of Malta today? Well, judging by their ability to constantly adapt and conquer the odds, I'd say the answer is absolutely yes. Thanks for exploring this remarkable history with me.